Hi there, welcome to Daria Yaps, where I yap and you try to make sense of it. I'm your host, Maurice, and today's victim is Stranger Things, which was created by brothers Matt and Ross Duffer. And if you've been literally anywhere in the last 10 years, I promise you've heard of it, at least once. Whether that was through Halloween costumes, TikTok edits, Kate Bush resurrecting, or Netflix reminding you for the 15th time that this is their biggest show. Because when Stranger Things premiered in July of 2016, it wasn't just a TV show with abnormally long episodes. It was a moment. And it didn't just attract viewers, it took over pop culture, becoming Netflix's most popular series, proving streaming originals could dominate the mainstream. And what made it work was that there was actually something for everyone. The show blended coming-of-age storytelling with snarky humor.
I bet she's deaf. Not deaf.
An iconic 80s aesthetic. And genuinely suspenseful horror.
What should I do?
It felt nostalgic without being too cheesy, scary without being excessive, and emotional without any force. But with the recent release of season 5, it becomes painfully clear that Stranger Things doesn't just end poorly, it's actively contradicting years of buildup. And what once felt intentional now feels confused. What once felt intimate now feels robotic, and the things that made the show special in the first place are either sidelined or completely erased. So, of course, spoiler warning ahead, but honestly, if you've already seen the finale, you probably know what I'm talking about. And that's not to say that season 5 was the sole reason the show crashed. No, season 5 is just where it became undeniable that the show was no longer interested in resolving itself. It was the writers' last chance to close the mysteries Stranger Things had been holding on to since season 1. And instead, they chose to capitalize on everything that once made the show special until it became borderline fan service.
Nance, you want me to go up?
Are you serious?
The finale doesn't just feel rushed, it actively contradicted what was set up in season 4, all to appease mainstream audiences. And as the seasons went on, horror was replaced with action. Not tension, not dread, but action and one-liners.
For us, I like Dick.
It felt like the show became obsessed with topping its own wow factor every season. And while that isn't a crime, it isn't good writing. Because as the action increased, the stakes didn't. Characters gained plot armor, deaths stopped being permanent, and emotional arcs began resetting themselves. Which brings me to my thesis. Stranger Things didn't kill itself with one bad finale. It did it through years of inconsistent writing, especially in its characters, plot logic, and its handling of queerness. And the clearest instance of this is the way Stranger Things completely lost control of its own characters. In the early seasons, characters actually changed. Trauma stuck, choices matter, and growth felt earned. But as the show went on, characters stopped evolving and started resetting. Emotional arcs repeated, conflicts reappeared without resolution, often with the promise that they'd be solved next season. But instead of building on what had already been established, the writing began to actively contradict itself. And the most obvious example of this is Mike Wheeler. Sorry, wrong picture. For years, the fandom was convinced Mike was one of the most complex, emotionally suppressed, and queer-coded characters on television. Someone deeply conflicted, emotionally avoidant, and struggling to articulate his own identity. And that reading wasn't random. It was fueled by the lack of Mike's internal perspective throughout the show, his emotional repression, and the intentional choices made in his character design, from his fashion to his room and his music taste to the way his relationships developed over time. So, when by the end of the show, Mike turns out to be his father, a symbol of conformity, an uncomfortable question gets raised. Did the fandom give the Duffer Brothers too much credit, or was this inconsistency meticulously planned from the start? Honestly, I think both can be true. Take Mike and Will's relationship in season 3. They fight, they reconcile, and their bond is reestablished as something unbreakable, even with Will moving away. But then season 4 opens and they're distant again. awkward, bickering, emotionally disconnected. Yes, they live in different towns, but the show had already established that distance wouldn't break them.
But what if you want to join another party? Not possible.
So why undo that growth if they're supposedly just best friends? And with the instances piling up, it becomes obvious that Mike was coded a certain way, but season 5 does nothing to honor it. For example, the painting storyline is never resolved. Instead, it's left as a stepping stone for the Malevolent endgame, and by the end, Mike's inability to say I love you to his girlfriend persists, even in her death.
I love you.
And finally, the stark contrast between how younger Mike treats Will versus how older Mike treats Will is never addressed, just brushed off, but still very present in season 5. All of these moments were set up as evidence of emotional suppression and potential queerness, only for the show to pretend they never meant anything at all. Late-stage Stranger Things isn't just forgetting its plot, it's forgetting who its characters were supposed to be. And that brings me to the most damaging consequence of the Duffer Brothers' inconsistent writing, the way Stranger Things capitalizes on queerness, not to explore it, not to honor it, but to use it. For years, the show dragged out the Mike and Will dynamic through intentional ambiguity. Byler was never accidental, it was carefully maintained, just enough to keep queer audiences invested, and just enough ambiguity that straight audiences would never fully catch on. This is the same reason Malevolent was kept emotionally unresolved for so long. Mike couldn't say I love you, their relationship stalled, fractured, and reset again, and again, it wasn't solely because it made narrative sense, but because the uncertainty between these two relationships kept conversations about the show alive. And this pattern doesn't stop there. Will's coming out scene, one of the most personal moments a queer character can have, doesn't even happen on his own terms. He's forced into it through fear by his abuser, and his identity is revealed through pain, fear, and possession, not self-discovery, not a choice. And while the show disguises this as something genuine, queer audiences recognize it for what it is.
And I thought I was finally okay with myself. But then today Vecna showed me what would happen if I did this, if I told you guys the truth. He showed me a future. And in this future, some of you are just worried for me. Worried that things will be harder for me, and it just makes me feel like something's wrong with me.
And even more telling is how the scene was handled behind the scenes. Noah Schnapp, Will's actor, a queer actor himself, later described performing that coming out scene feeling as he was putting on a play. And that matters, because when even a queer actor feels disconnected from a coming out moment, it exposes how little authenticity was actually present in its writing. It's obvious it wasn't written for queer people, it was written about them for straight audiences. So they kept it easy to digest, easy to applaud, easy to move on from. And while a coming out scene framed through trauma, acceptance, and symbolism might look heartfelt on screen, the reality is that it reads as safe, distant, and palatable. It's a coming out scene designed to be interpreted, not felt. In other words, it's a coming out scene for straight people. And that's the core issue. Stranger Things doesn't just sideline its queer characters, it turns their identities into entertainment, something to speculate about, something to tease, something to stretch out for engagement without ever following through. And that isn't representation, that's exploitation. So in the end, I don't think Stranger Things tanked because the fans expected too much. It failed because the writing stopped respecting what made people care about it in the first place. It traded horror for wow factor, growth for reputation, and representation for engagement. What started out as a story about outsiders slowly became a product made for the mainstream, one that borrowed queerness, emotion, and intimacy without ever committing to them. And that's the real tragedy. Stranger Things didn't just end badly, they forgot who it was made for. And this has been Daria Yaps. Thanks for listening. And one last thing. If you're gonna make a show about rebelling against norms, don't conform to them in your last episode.